The moment the music started, my 7-year-old son went completely still. He turned to me, his big brown eyes wide with a specific kind of terror I knew all too well, and his small hand found mine, gripping it like a vice. He whispered, his voice barely a tremor, "Mommy, she's making the bad sound." I followed his gaze across the living room, a space filled with quiet grief and polite murmurs. And there she was, my sister-in-law, Meredith. She was holding it, the antique silver music box my late husband Mark had given me on our first anniversary. She was smiling, a tight, knowing little smile, as she wound the key, again. And in that instant, I didn't just see a woman playing a music box. I saw a weapon being aimed, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was not a tribute. It was an attack. And less than 5 minutes later, my entire world would be shattered, not by the sound, but by the silence that followed. Just before the explosion, I was trying so hard to hold it all together. It was the 3rd anniversary of Mark's passing. The house felt both too full and too empty. Mark's parents, Richard and Helen, were huddled on the sofa, accepting condolences with the tired grace of people who have been grieving for 3 straight years. Friends milled about, speaking in the hushed tones reserved for funerals and libraries. My best friend, Sarah, was a fortress by my side, refilling coffee cups and shooting daggers with her eyes at anyone who dared to offer a platitude like, "He's in a better place." And then there was Meredith, Mark's younger sister, moving through the space with a proprietary air, as if she were the curator of her brother's memory, and I was just a temporary exhibit. And my son Leo, my sweet, sensitive boy. He was my shadow, one hand clutching the hem of my black dress, the other holding his favorite thing in the world, a soft, heavy, deep blue weighted lap pad, shaped like a dinosaur. It was his anchor. Leo is a brilliant kid, but the world is often too much for him. Loud noises, bright lights, big crowds. They overwhelm his senses. A therapist once described it as having the volume of the world turned up to 11, with no way to turn it down. So we'd built a life of quiet routines, of gentle transitions, of knowing his triggers and respecting his needs. His weighted pad and his noise-canceling headphones were his tools, his armor. They allowed him to exist in a world that often felt hostile to him. This gathering was already a huge stretch for him. I had hesitated for weeks before agreeing to it, but Meredith had been insistent. "We need to honor Mark," she'd said, her voice laced with that familiar implication that my quiet, private grief wasn't the right kind. "And Leo needs to be around family. He needs to learn to be part of things. Mark would have wanted him to be strong." That was always her trump card, what Mark would have wanted. As if she had a direct line to the afterlife, and he was feeding her instructions on how I was failing as a mother. So I relented. I baked Mark's favorite lemon cake. I put out the photos. I opened my home, our home, Leo's and mine, to this wave of well-meaning but overwhelming sadness. I thought I could manage it. I thought Leo could manage it, with his tools and with me by his side. That was my first mistake, believing that for Meredith, this day was about honoring her brother. The music box sat on the mantelpiece, where it always did. It was beautiful, ornate silver, but its tune was jarring. It was a fast, tinkling, almost frantic classical piece that Mark had found hilarious. I'd always found it slightly unpleasant, and for Leo it was like nails on a chalkboard. The high, unpredictable pitch was one of his biggest triggers. We never, ever played it. It was a memento, an object of memory, not a toy. Meredith knew this. I had explicitly told her, more than once, after seeing her eye it on previous visits. It's beautiful, but the sound is really painful for Leo. We just keep it for display, I had explained gently. She had just nodded, that same tight little smile on her face. So when she picked it up, I felt a knot form in my stomach. I was just thinking, she announced to the room, her voice projecting over the quiet chatter. Mark loved this old thing. I think he'd love to hear it today. A little piece of him, here with us. Before I could even form a sentence, before I could say, Meredith, please don't. She had wound it up and opened the lid. The frantic, high-pitched melody filled the room. It was painfully loud in the quiet space. Every head turned, and I felt Leo's hand on mine go rigid. He froze. His breathing hitched. His eyes were locked on the music box, his face draining of all color. Mommy, he whispered again, a plea. And I saw the look on Meredith's face. It wasn't nostalgia. It was triumph. She was watching Leo, waiting for him to break. She was conducting not a song, but an experiment. And my son was her subject. The simmering pot had been boiling for 3 years, ever since the day we lost Mark. His death was sudden, a car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning, and it ripped a hole through all of our lives. But in the vacuum he left behind, Meredith tried to appoint herself as the new authority. In the beginning, it was small things. She'd rearranged the photos on my bookshelf to feature Mark more prominently. She'd bring over food she knew I didn't like, but that Mark had loved. She'd talk about him in the present tense, as if he were just in the other room, and would look at me with pity when I used the past tense. It was her way of asserting that her grief was more authentic, that her connection was stronger, and that I was, in some way, an imposter in my own life. The real battleground, however, became Leo. Mark had been gone for a year when we got Leo's sensory processing disorder diagnosis. For me, it was a relief. It wasn't bad behavior. It wasn't a phase. It was a neurological reality. It had a name. It gave us a roadmap. We could get him the help and the tools he needed. But for Meredith, it was a disgrace. There's nothing wrong with him, she'd insist over the phone. He's a boy. Boys are supposed to be loud and rough. You're just babying him. Mark would never have stood for this. That phrase again. A hammer she used to try and pound me into submission. She saw his headphones as a weakness, his weighted blanket as a crutch. She believed my gentle parenting, my focus on creating a calm environment, was a betrayal of Mark's more boisterous, outgoing nature. She thought I was trying to erase her brother by raising a son who wasn't a carbon copy of him. I tried to explain. I sent her articles. I forwarded emails from his occupational therapist. I invited her to a session. She refused. I don't need a therapist to tell me how to raise a child, she scoffed. You just need to let him be a normal kid. Her definition of normal seemed to be a constant state of sensory assault. When she would visit, she'd turn the TV volume way up. She'd start the vacuum cleaner without warning. She once brought her new puppy, a yapping, hyperactive terrier, into our quiet home and let it run wild, laughing as Leo retreated to his room in tears. Each time, I'd have to intervene, calmly but firmly asking her to stop. And each time, she would feign innocence. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I just forget how sensitive he is." The word dripped with condescension. It was a constant, low-grade war, a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts designed to prove her point, that I was incompetent, overprotective, and raising a child who would be unfit for the world. And my in-laws, Richard and Helen, were caught in the crossfire. They are good people, but they are conflict-averse and blinded by their own grief. They see Meredith's aggression as passion. "She just misses her brother so much," Helen would say. Wringing her hands after another one of Meredith's visits left me shaken. "She's just trying to keep his spirit alive." They wanted to believe that. They wanted to believe their surviving child was just grieving, loudly, not acting maliciously. They let her reframe the narrative. My requests for quiet weren't about protecting my son. They were about me being anxious. My structured routines weren't supportive. They were controlling. Meredith was an expert at painting me as the unstable one, the fragile widow who was projecting her own issues onto her son. And slowly, subtly, I think they started to believe her. I could feel their trust in me eroding, replaced by a kind of gentle pity that was almost worse than outright judgment. They started suggesting things couched in concern. Maybe a different school, one with more activity? Perhaps he should spend a weekend with us, get him out of his bubble. They were Meredith's words, coming out of their mouths. I knew this gathering for the anniversary would be a flashpoint. I could feel it in the weeks leading up to it. Meredith's calls became more frequent, her suggestions more like commands. She was the one who insisted we invite a large group. Mark knew so many people. They deserve a chance to pay their respects. It wasn't about them. It was about having an audience. She was setting a stage. And I, wanting to keep the peace, wanting to believe that just this once we could get through a day without a fight. I agreed. I walked right into her trap. I set the table. I lit the candles. And I welcomed the jury into my home. I told myself it would be okay. I told myself that on a day like today, a day dedicated to the memory of the man we all loved, she wouldn't dare. I was so wrong. The music box tune drilled into my skull. It was maybe 10 seconds of music, but it felt like an eternity. Leo's whole body was trembling, and he let out a choked little sob. That's when I moved. I scooped him up, his little body stiff with panic, and I turned my back on the room. "Excuse us," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I didn't look at Meredith. I didn't look at anyone. My only focus was Leo. I carried him down the hallway to his bedroom, his face buried in my neck, his small fists clenched in my dress. The high-pitched music faded as I closed his door behind us, plunging us into blessed silence. He was hyperventilating, his breaths coming in ragged, painful gasps. "Okay, baby. Okay," I murmured, sitting on the edge of his bed. "We're safe now. Mama's here. Let's get your headphones." I reached for the little hook next to his bed where his bright red noise-canceling headphones always hung. It was empty. My heart skipped a beat. Okay, weird. Maybe he'd left them in the living room. I scanned his room. Then I looked for his security dinosaur. The weighted lap pad. He was supposed to have it with him. He did have it with him. I distinctly remember him clutching it when we greeted people at the door. It wasn't in his hands now. It wasn't on his bed. It wasn't on the floor. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, washed over me. I stood up and quickly checked his closet, his bookshelf, under his bed. Nothing. Both of his primary comfort tools, the two things that could bring him down from a full-blown panic attack, were gone. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't a coincidence. This was orchestrated. She hadn't just created the trigger. She had disarmed him first. She had set a fire and hidden the fire extinguisher. The cruelty of it took my breath away. It was a level of premeditated malice I hadn't allowed myself to believe she was capable of. I turned back to Leo, who was now rocking back and forth on the bed, his hands over his ears even though the room was silent. "It's too loud, Mommy. It's too loud inside my head," he cried. My own panic was rising, a frantic buzzing in my ears, but I shoved it down. He needed me to be calm. He needed me to be his anchor when his own had been stolen. "I know, baby, I know. We're going to fix it." I opened his dresser drawer, my hands shaking as I fumbled past his little t-shirts and pulled out the backup. It was an older weighted stuffed animal, a sloth, not his favorite, but it would have to do. I wrapped it around his shoulders. "Here we go. Squeeze him tight. Let's do our breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. We sat there on his bed, the muffled sounds of the gathering outside the door, a distant hum, and we breathed. Me, guiding him through the exercises, my voice a low, steady murmur. Him, clinging to the backup sloth, his sobs slowly, gradually, subsiding, and as he calmed down, my own mind cleared, and the fuzzy, confused shock was replaced by a cold, hard rage. It settled deep in my bones. This wasn't about grief. This wasn't about what Mark would have wanted. This was about power. This was about control. This was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty against a defenseless child, designed to prove a point to a room full of people. She wanted him to have a public meltdown. She wanted everyone to see him fall apart. She wanted them to look at me, the mother who couldn't control her own son, and think, she can't handle this. She's failing. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over my friend Sarah's name. I typed a single, simple message. Code red. In Leo's room. She did it. I didn't need to explain. Sarah knew. I pressed send. Then I stood up, took a deep breath, and prepared to walk back into that war zone. But this time, I wasn't fighting to keep the peace. I was fighting to end it. The flashback hit me then, sitting on the floor of Leo's room, while he finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. It wasn't one memory, but a dozen. A collage of moments that on their own seemed like minor grievances, but, when stitched together, formed a tapestry of escalating aggression. I remembered the first Christmas after Mark died. I was a wreck, barely functioning. Meredith had insisted on hosting. She'd wrapped dozens of gifts for Leo, all of them loud, flashing, battery-operated toys. The exact kind of thing I had asked people not to get him. When I tried to gently put them aside to open later, she'd made a show of it. "Oh, don't you want to play with your new fire truck, Leo? Auntie Meredith got it just for you." She'd switched it on, and the siren, loud enough to wake the dead, had sent a then 4-year-old Leo screaming from the room. My father-in-law, Richard, had just sighed and said, "Well, she meant well." I remembered Leo's 5th birthday party. I'd planned a small, quiet affair in our backyard with just a few of his closest friends from school. It was perfect. Calm, structured, fun. Halfway through, Meredith showed up, uninvited, with her 2 cousins and their 3 chaotic children in tow. They descended on the party like a pack of wolves, tearing through my carefully planned games, grabbing at the cake with their hands, and turning the volume of our gentle gathering up to a deafening roar. Leo spent the last hour of his own party hiding in his playhouse. When I confronted Meredith later, she feigned shock. "What? I thought you'd want more family here. I was just trying to make it more festive. You're always so serious." She had a way of twisting my reasonable boundaries into character flaws. My desire for calm became my anxiety. My son's needs became my overprotectiveness. The worst incident, before today, was at the community pool last summer. I had finally gotten Leo comfortable with going, as long as we went during off-peak hours when it was quiet. We had a routine. We found a secluded corner. He had his water toys, I had my book. It was our little oasis. Meredith found out we were going and decided to surprise us. She brought a massive Bluetooth speaker and blasted pop music right next to our blanket. "A little energy," she chirped. When I asked her to please turn it down, she'd rolled her eyes and addressed the other people around the pool. "Sorry, folks. The fun police are here." A few people laughed. I had felt my face burn with humiliation. We had to pack up and leave, with Leo in tears, his safe space violated. That night, her mother, Helen, had called me. "Clara, honey, I know you're trying your best, but Meredith is worried. She thinks you're isolating him. She thinks you're afraid to let him experience the real world." It was then that I realized Meredith wasn't just being thoughtless. She was building a case against me. She was gathering evidence, creating incidents, and then reporting her skewed version of them back to her parents, positioning herself as the concerned, capable aunt, and me as the neurotic, failing mother. She was obsessed with the idea of legacy. Mark's legacy. But her version of his legacy was a performance. It was loud. It was public. It was about showing the world how much you cared. My version was quiet. It was in the stories I told Leo about his father, before bed. It was in the way I tried to build a life for our son that was full of peace and security, the 2 things that had been stolen from us. She saw my quiet life as an insult to his memory. She saw my son's gentle nature as a flaw that needed to be aggressively corrected. She didn't want to honor Mark. She wanted to own him. She wanted to own his memory. And by extension, she wanted to own his son. Today wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a 3-year campaign. It was her final, desperate move to prove that I was unfit to be the guardian of Mark's legacy, and that she was the only one who could step in and save it. As Leo's breathing evened out into the soft rhythm of sleep, my resolve hardened into something unbreakable. I was done being gentle. I was done explaining. She had tried to break my son. Now I was going to break her narrative. I walked out of Leo's room and closed the door softly behind me. The buzz of conversation in the living room died down the moment they saw me. Every eye was on me, I scanned the room. Sarah was standing by the kitchen entrance, her arms crossed, her expression murderous. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. My in-laws, Richard and Helen, were on the sofa, looking worried and confused. And Meredith was standing by the mantelpiece, the music box now closed, a look of strained, counterfeit concern on her face. "Is he all right?" she asked, her voice dripping with full sympathy. I ignored her question. I walked calmly to the center of the room, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from shaking. I looked directly at her. "Where are they?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Meredith blinked, feigning ignorance. "Where are what, Clara? What are you talking about?" "Leo's headphones. And his dinosaur lap pad. They're gone. Where are they?" She let out a little theatrical laugh. "Oh, honey, how would I know? You're the one who keeps track of all his things. He probably just misplaced them. You know how he is. The condescension, the public dismissal. It was meant to make me look hysterical. It didn't work. Not anymore." "No," I said, my voice still level. "He doesn't misplace them. Not those things. He had the dinosaur in his hand when he came through the door. The headphones were on their hook by his bed this morning. Now they're both gone. And you're the only person who would have any reason to take them." Richard stood up. "Clara, let's not make accusations. We're all upset right now." "I'm not upset, Richard," I said, not taking my eyes off Meredith. "I'm asking a question. A question she is refusing to answer." I took a step closer to her. The air crackled with tension. "You picked up that music box. You knew what that sound does to him. I have told you repeatedly. But you played it anyway. In a room full of people. You wanted him to have a meltdown, didn't you? You wanted an audience." "That is a monstrous thing to say," Meredith gasped, placing a hand over her heart. She looked at her parents, her eyes wide, playing the victim. "I was just trying to honor my brother. I thought hearing it might bring a nice memory." "A nice memory?" I laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "A nice memory of what, Meredith? Of him screaming in terror? Of him having a panic attack on the floor? And then, when he needed his tools, his armor, to help him cope with the assault you just perpetrated, they were conveniently missing. Where are they, Meredith?" Her composure finally cracked. A flash of pure venom crossed her face before she could mask it. "Maybe if you didn't coddle him with all those ridiculous crutches, he wouldn't need them," she hissed, her voice low and furious. "Maybe if you raised him to be tough, like his father, a little music wouldn't send him over the edge." And there it was. The truth, out in the open for everyone to hear. The room was dead silent. Helen let out a little gasp. Richard just stared, his face ashen. "So you admit it," I said softly. "You did it on purpose. You took his things and you played that music to hurt him, to prove a point." "I was trying to help him," she shrieked, her voice rising now, losing its careful control. "You're turning him into a weak, pathetic little creature who can't handle the real world. You're smothering him. Mark would be ashamed of you. He would be horrified by what you've done to his son." Sarah stepped forward then. "That's enough, Meredith." "No," I said, holding up a hand. "Let her finish. Let everyone hear it." "What exactly do you think you were achieving today, Meredith? What was the grand plan? Humiliate a 7-year-old child on the anniversary of his father's death? make his grandparents think his mother is unstable. What was the end game? She just stood there, breathing heavily, her face flushed with rage and humiliation. She had lost control of the narrative. In her attempt to expose me as an unfit mother, she had exposed herself as a monster. I turned to her parents. "Did you hear her?" I asked them, my voice breaking for the first time, not with weakness, but with a profound, soul-deep sorrow. "This is what I have been dealing with for 3 years. This isn't grief. This is cruelty. She deliberately hurt my child. Your grandson." Helen was openly weeping now. Richard looked like he had been struck. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no words. He had no defense for her. I turned back to Meredith. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "Get out," I said. She stared at me, disbelieving. "What? Get out of my house now." My voice was iron. "And don't ever, ever come near my son again." I looked at her parents. "You too. I need you to leave." The pain on their faces was immense, but in that moment, I couldn't care. They had enabled her. Their passivity, their refusal to see what was right in front of them, had helped build the stage for today's horror show. Meredith grabbed her purse. "Fine," she spat. "Stay in your pathetic little bubble. But don't come crying to us when he's 20 years old and can't even leave the house. You're ruining him, and you know it." She stormed out, slamming the front door behind her. Her parents hesitated. Helen looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Clara, we didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Please, just go." They left without another word, closing the door softly behind them, the sound echoing the final, devastating collapse of our family. The remaining guests, horrified witnesses to the entire ugly spectacle, began to melt away, murmuring apologies and scurrying out as if fleeing a contaminated zone. Within minutes, the house was empty, save for me, Sarah, and my sleeping son. The silence that was left wasn't peaceful. It was the dead, hollow silence of a battlefield after the fighting is over. Sarah walked over and put her arms around me. I didn't cry. I was too empty, too scoured out. "I found them, by the way," she said quietly into my ear. "The headphones and the dinosaur, stuffed in the bottom of the linen closet, under a pile of old towels." "Of course. Hidden away where no one would find them until it was too late." I just nodded, leaning into my friend, the only family I had left. The aftermath was a slow, rolling wave of consequences. The first few days were a blur of texts and voicemails. Meredith sent a barrage of them, a toxic mix of non-apologies and accusations. "I can't believe you would turn my own parents against me. I was only trying to do what's best for Leo. You are a vindictive, selfish person." I read the first few, then I blocked her number. I blocked her on every social media platform. I digitally amputated her from my life. The hardest call was from Richard, my father-in-law. He called 2 days later. His voice was heavy with a sorrow that felt ancient. "Clara," he started, "your mother-in-law and I, we are so sorry. We had no idea of the extent. We let Meredith cloud our judgment." "I tried to tell you, Richard," I said, my voice flat. "For years. You didn't listen." "I know," he whispered. We just wanted to believe the best of our daughter. After losing Mark, the thought of another conflict." He trailed off. She's agreed to go to therapy. She knows she crossed a line. A line, I laughed, a humorless puff of air. Richard, she didn't cross a line. She built a rocket, launched it over the line, and nuked the entire continent on the other side. This wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. She terrorized my son to prove a point. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "What do you want us to do?" he finally asked, his voice cracking. "We don't want to lose you. We don't want to lose Leo." And that was the question that kept me up at night. What did I want? Part of me wanted to burn it all down, to cut them all off and never look back. But then I'd look at Leo, and I'd see Mark in the curve of his smile, and I knew that Mark's parents were his only living connection to his father. Could I sever that? "Here are the new rules," I said, the words coming to me with a clarity that surprised me. "You are welcome to see Leo, but never ever with Meredith. Not in the same house, not at the same event, not for a single minute. If I find out you have tried to orchestrate some accidental run-in, that will be the last time you ever see him. Period." "Of course, Clara, absolutely. And you will never again question my parenting decisions," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "You will never again suggest he needs to be tougher, or that I am coddling him. You will respect his needs and my rules. You are his grandparents, not his doctors, and not his parents. If you can agree to that, we can try to find a way forward. If not, then there's nothing more to say." He agreed to everything, his voice thick with relief and shame. It was a start, but the trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces. It would take years to rebuild, if it ever could be. The relationship would never be the warm, easy thing it once was. It would now be a carefully negotiated treaty, with clearly defined borders and a constant awareness of the potential for another war. Sarah was my rock through it all. She didn't offer advice unless I asked. She didn't tell me I was strong. She just showed up. She brought groceries when I couldn't face the store. She sat with Leo and built elaborate Lego castles while I took long, aimless walks to clear my head. She let me be a mess. One night, a week after the incident, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring into space. "I feel like I failed him," I whispered. "I let her into his home, his safe space. I let her hurt him." Sarah pulled up a chair and put her hand over mine. "Clara, listen to me. You didn't fail him. You taught him the most important lesson in the world." I looked at her, confused. "What lesson?" "You taught him that when someone hurts you, your mother will burn their world to the ground to protect you," she said, her voice fierce. "You taught him that his well-being is more important than anyone else's feelings. You taught him that his needs are valid and worth defending. You didn't keep the peace. You kept him safe. That's not failure. That's the whole damn job." Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still bleeding. And for the first time in a week, I cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but tears of release. She was right. I had done the right thing. 6 months have passed. Our house is quiet again. It's a purposeful quiet, a curated peace. Leo is thriving. We found him a new therapist who specializes in trauma, and he's slowly learning to trust that his home is his fortress again. He talks about the sad day sometimes, but his voice is matter-of-fact now, not fearful. He knows he was protected. He knows he is safe. That is my victory. My relationship with my in-laws is careful. They visit once every couple of weeks. They are painfully polite. They bring Leo quiet gifts, like books and art supplies. They never mention Meredith's name. I know they see her separately. That's their business. But they have honored their promise to me. The warmth is gone, replaced by a strained formality. But the connection to Mark, for Leo's sake, remains, however tenuously. I don't know if it will ever feel normal again. Maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe some things, once broken, can't be perfectly mended. They can only be glued back together, with the cracks always visible as a reminder of the damage. I learned something profound in the wreckage of that day. For 3 years, I had been trying to navigate an impossible situation. I was trying to honor my late husband, manage my own grief, raise a child with special needs, and appease a family that was fundamentally opposed to my methods. I was so focused on keeping the peace that I was sacrificing my own. I was so afraid of being seen as the difficult, angry widow that I allowed someone to repeatedly harm my son. My desire to be seen as reasonable was actually endangering him. The real lesson wasn't about Meredith's cruelty. It was about my own complicity in the face of it. Every time I let one of her passive-aggressive comments slide, every time I made excuses for her behavior, every time I prioritized her feelings over Leo's comfort, I was teaching him that his needs came second. I was teaching him that he should endure pain to make someone else comfortable. The music box wasn't the first shot. It was just the one I could no longer ignore. My biggest mistake wasn't trusting Meredith. It was not trusting myself. My maternal instinct, that deep primal roar that told me something was wrong, had been whispering for years. I just kept shushing it, telling it to be polite. Now, I listen to it. It's the loudest voice in my head. Protecting your child isn't overprotective. Creating a safe environment isn't coddling. It's parenting. It is the fundamental, non-negotiable requirement of the job. You are your child's advocate, their defender, their fortress. And sometimes, building that fortress means you have to declare war on the people you once called family. It's a brutal, heartbreaking choice, but it's not really a choice at all. It's a duty. The peace I have now isn't the fragile, temporary peace of appeasement. It's the deep, resilient peace of knowing I did the right thing. It's the peace that comes from choosing my child over everything and everyone else. This new life is smaller in some ways. Our circle is tighter. The holidays are quieter. There are empty chairs at our table now. But our home is safer than it has ever been. Leo's laughter fills these rooms now, unburdened by the fear of a sudden jarring noise. He's learning to navigate the world on his own terms, with confidence in the tools he has and the unwavering support behind him. I thought my primary job was to protect Mark's memory. I was wrong. My job is to protect his son. And in doing so, I'm creating a legacy for Leo that is far more valuable than any antique music box. It's a legacy of safety, of trust, and of unconditional love. And so I want to leave you with this. We are often told that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that forgiveness is a virtue. But that narrative often forgets to mention that safety is a right, especially for a child. Your peace of mind is not a luxury you should have to bargain for. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your child, and for yourself, is to walk away, to build a new, smaller, safe at her boat, and let the other one sink. It's not about giving up on family. It's about redefining it. It's about recognizing that true family are the people who help you feel safe in the storm, not the ones who are creating the storm themselves. So I'll ask you what I asked myself in the quiet aftermath of it all. Have you ever been told you were being too sensitive or overprotective when you were just trying to defend your boundaries or protect someone you love? How do you draw the line between keeping the peace and enabling toxic behavior? Share your stories in the comments below. Reading them, sharing them. It reminds us all that we aren't alone in these battles. And sometimes, just knowing that can be the anchor that gets you through. Thank you for listening.